When Jasmine Crockett stood her ground in that moment, what resonated most was not the sharpness of her tongue, but the remarkable steadiness of her presence. Justice Brett Kavanaugh's chuckle had been the sort of reaction designed, intentionally or not, to minimize her words, to reduce them to something unserious. It was not an outright interruption, not a blatant statement, but something more subtle, almost casual, and that is precisely why it stung. In that small laugh, there was an implication that her points were not worthy of the weight she was giving them. For many, such a moment could have been destabilizing, provoking an emotional or defensive reaction, but Crockett's answer to his dismissal was something entirely different. Her composure became her strength. Rather than rising to his provocation with heat, she leaned into an approach that made the contrast between them glaring. Kavanaugh's laughter was impulsive, unguarded, and tinged with the arrogance of power. Her response, in contrast, was measured, deliberate, and razor. She did not allow his position as a Supreme Court justice to intimidate her, nor did she allow his laugh to diminish her focus. Instead, she reminded the chamber without theatrics that control belonged to the one who did not waver. The coldness in her reply was not rooted in anger. It was rooted in precision. She made it clear that she was not there to entertain, nor to play into the games of dismissal or condescension. She was there to put forward arguments grounded in reality and backed by conviction. In doing so, she forced everyone in the room to recognize the imbalance between the casualness of his chuckle and the seriousness of her task. It is a rare skill to turn a dismissive gesture into a stage for authority, and she did so effortlessly, leaving no doubt about where the strength lay. Kavanaugh himself seemed caught off guard by her reaction. His laugh had been intended as an aside, a moment of levity at someone else's expense. But suddenly it was magnified under her gaze. His role as a justice might have shielded him in countless settings, but in that instance, it only amplified the weight of her pushback. CrockettsVoice.com, yet unyielding, reframed the power dynamic in real time. The people in the chamber were not looking at the justice anymore. They were listening to her, watching her reclaim the narrative. What makes her response so significant is that it revealed a lesson about how composure can be far more devastating than fury. A heated retort might have validated the laugh, reducing the exchange to little more than an emotional clash. But by maintaining her balance, she placed Kavanaugh in a position where his own action appeared petty, shallow, and beneath the dignity of his role. She didn't need to exaggerate. Her authority had revealed itself naturally through her self-control. That moment also highlighted how composure under pressure can shift not just a single interaction, but the perception of an entire room. Observers could sense the gravity of her cold reply. They could see that Kavanaugh, in laughing, had overplayed his hand, and that she had seized the opportunity to underscore the seriousness of her role and the hollowness of his reaction. It was a masterclass in turning an attempted slight into a demonstration of dominance, not through volume, but through restraint. For many watching, the exchange carried a deeper symbolism. In spaces where women, particularly women of color, often met with subtle forms of dismissal, Crockett's handling of the moment became an example of how to flip the script. By refusing to react with visible frustration or fluster, she denied him the satisfaction of seeing her unsettled. Instead, she gave him nothing but a controlled, unwavering rebuke that demanded respect. Justice Kavanaugh, who had chuckled so freely only moments before, was left to sit in the silence of her words. No one else in the chamber dared to laugh. No one else treated her arguments as anything less than serious. In reclaiming that space with composure, Crockett not only silenced him but set the tone for the rest of the proceedings. What began as an attempt to undermine her turned into a reminder that authority is not about the title one carries but about how one handles pressure when the balance of respect is at stake. The pause that followed Justice Brett Kavanaugh's chuckle was brief, but in that briefness it carried the weight of something unspoken. Jasmine Crockett knew the power of timing, and in choosing not to immediately continue, she allowed the silence to expand around the room. It was not the silence of someone caught off guard, nor the hesitation of someone unsure of what to say. It was the silence of someone in complete control of their own presence, someone deliberately choosing to make others sit with the discomfort of what had just occurred. That silence was louder than his laugh. Kavanaugh's chuckle had been casual, almost as if he thought it would disappear into the background noise of the proceedings. But when Crockett stopped and fixed her eyes, the room noticed. That moment of silence became a mirror, reflecting back on him what his laughter actually meant. Every ear in the chamber became tuned to her next move, and every eye shifted from him to her. She had created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, his dismissal no longer seemed small. It was magnified. When she finally spoke, her words carried more weight precisely because of that silence. It was as if she had gathered the air itself and compressed it, so when she broke it, the sound reverberated with a force far stronger than if she had spoken without pause. Kavanaugh, for all his authority as a justice, found himself sitting in a space he could no longer control. She had set the tempo, and everyone else was following. The choice to let silence do the work before speaking is often underestimated. Many would have rushed to respond, eager to assert themselves quickly in the face of disrespect. But Crockett understood something deeper. that silence can make the person who acted out of turn feel the weight of their own behavior more than an immediate rebuke. In that stillness, Kavanaugh's chuckle seemed to echo longer than he intended. The longer the silence stretched, the more inappropriate it seemed, and by the time she opened her mouth, he was already diminished. Her eventual words were delivered without anger, but the coldness in her tone was impossible to mistake. The silence had been the setup, the sharpness of her reply was the conclusion. Together, they made it clear that she would not tolerate belittlement, not even in its smallest form. She did not need to raise her voice, and she did not need to scold. Her point had already been made before she even spoke, and the silence had done half the work. Kavanaugh, who had let out the chuckle so easily, could not undo it. He shifted slightly, as though trying to re-establish composure of his own, but there was nothing to be done. In the contrast between his impulsive laugh and her deliberate silence, the roles had reversed. He had seemed powerful when he chuckled. Now he seemed careless. She had seemed the target of dismissal. Now she was the one holding the room captive. Observers saw the exchange unfold like a shift in weather, where a laugh might have passed unnoticed in another context. Her silence turned it into a thunderclap. His reaction, once hidden in casualness, now looked glaringly out of place. By controlling herself, she had forced him into a position of exposure. And once exposed, there was no retreat. That moment also carried a broader lesson about how silence can function as a form of speech. It is not emptiness. It is a choice. Crockett used it as a weapon, one sharper than shouting could ever be. Her silence told him, "You may laugh, but I will not let you laugh at me." It told the room, "This is not entertainment. This is serious." And it told everyone listening that she was not there to be dismissed, not by anyone, not even by a justice of the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh likely realized too late how quickly a laugh can turn into a liability when met with that kind of poise. He had underestimated the room and, more importantly, underestimated her. Crockett's silence reminded him and everyone else that the true measure of authority is not in how loudly one speaks, but in how effectively one commands attention, even without speaking at all. Justice Brett Kavanaugh's chuckle had not been a statement in words, but it carried the weight of one. In that small sound, he communicated dismissal, skepticism, and a kind of quiet mockery. What made the moment striking was how subtle it was, something so quick and seemingly harmless, yet filled with meaning. It was the type of gesture often overlooked, the kind that slides by in spaces where power tilts heavily toward those who hold titles like his. But Jasmine Crockett refused to let it pass unnoticed. She understood the corrosive nature of those small dismissals, how they chip away at credibility, how they plant seeds of doubt in the minds of observers, and by refusing to gloss over his laugh, she revealed the disrespect embedded in it for all to see. For Crockett, acknowledging that chuckle wasn't about personal pride, it was about principle. Too often, gestures like that are allowed to slide, normalized until they become part of the culture of discourse. Laughter at someone else's serious argument isn't just unprofessional, it suggests their words don't merit attention. Kavanaugh, with his casual chuckle, embodied that tendency to dismiss without directly engaging. Had she ignored it, the moment might have faded, but it also would have reinforced the idea that such behavior could stand unchecked. Instead, she called it out not with fire, but with an icy precision that forced everyone to confront what had happened. The coldness in her reply stripped away any ambiguity. She didn't laugh with him, didn't brush it off with a polite smile, didn't even soften the sting with lightness. She met it with seriousness, and in doing so, she exposed the underlying problem that someone in his position thought it appropriate to minimize. Her words with a laugh in the first place. The chamber, which might have otherwise let the chuckle vanish into the noise, now had to reckon with the truth. She surfaced that power can express itself not only in speeches and rulings, but in small acts of disrespect. Kavanaugh himself seemed to realize, as her words landed, that what he thought was a fleeting gesture had been magnified. He had not interrupted her, not officially, yet she revealed that his interruption was real in its effect. It undermined the dignity of the exchange, and once she pulled it into the open, the authority he carried did not shield him. Instead, it only made his lapse stand out more starkly. When a justice laughs at an argument, it is not just a chuckle, it is a signal that fairness is being tainted by condescension. Crockett's decision to confront that signal transformed it into a public reminder of the disrespect that often hides behind gestures too small to challenge. Her ability to reveal that disrespect mattered not just for the moment but for the larger context of public discourse. If a justice could laugh at her without consequence, then anyone watching might take the same cue that her points were laughable, that her seriousness could be dismissed. But by shutting him down with calm conviction, she reasserted the value of her words. She made clear that they were not jokes, not performances, but arguments demanding recognition. And in exposing his laughter as an act of belittlement, she also forced others in the room to recognize how often such behavior undermines meaningful debate. The contrast between them could not have been sharper. His laugh was casual, almost careless, the act of someone confident in his position. Her response was deliberate, rooted in the recognition that casual disrespect left unchallenged becomes permission for more of the same. By turning this moment of levity into a moment of accountability, she highlighted how easily authority can slip into arrogance, and how dangerous it is when left unchecked. Observers in the chamber could feel the shift. They had heard the laugh, perhaps even thought it unremarkable at first, but when Crockett called it out, they felt its sting. What once seemed minor now looked glaring, and in that way, her response did more than silence. It educated the room. It reminded everyone that small acts of dismissal, when examined closely, are not small at all. They are cracks in the foundation of respect that every serious discussion requires. For Kavanaugh, the moment must have felt uncomfortable. His authority as a justice could not shield him from the reality Crockett laid bare. His laugh had not been neutral. It had been corrosive, and once she made that visible, there was no way to retreat from it. What had started as a moment of mockery ended as a reminder that power, when used to belittle, will always be vulnerable to exposure. What struck many in the chamber was how quickly the balance of authority shifted. Justice Brett Kavanaugh had entered the moment as the figure with unquestioned stature. His role as a Supreme Court justice carried a weight that few could challenge. His chuckle, small as it was, seemed to rely on that authority, on unspoken assumption that he could laugh without consequence, because his position shielded him. But Jasmine Crockett's cold response dismantled that shield in an instant, and the power dynamic in the room changed hands before anyone had time to process it. Her voice was not loud, nor was it tinged with anger. Instead, it carried the steadiness of someone who knew the value of control. The way she addressed him made it clear that titles did not intimidate her, that the substance of her words was not up for ridicule. Kavanaugh's laugh, which had carried an air of superiority, suddenly seemed hollow against the weight of her measured tone. Authority is often assumed to belong to those with institutional power, but in that moment, Crockett demonstrated how it can be seized by anyone who refuses to yield their dignity. The effect was almost immediate. The justice who had been at ease enough to chuckle now looked unsettled, and the representative who had been on the receiving end of that chuckle now commanded the room. People leaned forward, listening not to him but to her. What began as a moment where he appeared to hold the upper hand ended as a moment that highlighted her presence as the stronger one. This reversal showed that authority is not static. It shifts according to how people carry themselves under pressure. Kavanaugh's position did not vanish, but it lost its aura of untouchability. His laugh, so light-hearted when it left his lips, now weighed on him because it had been reframed as disrespect. Crockett's refusal to be minimized exposed the vulnerability in his authority, the fact that it depended not just on his title but on the perception of his seriousness. Once she stripped away the dignity from his laugh, he no longer appeared unshakable. Instead, it was she who appeared immovable, steady in her resolve and unwilling to be reduced to an object of mockery. That shift resonated far beyond the chamber. Observers could sense that something had changed in the rhythm of the exchange. It wasn't just that she had responded, it was how she had responded. A cold, precise reply carries a kind of finality that anger cannot. Anger invites back and forth, but composure creates closure. There was nothing left for Kavanaugh to say. The laugh could not be repeated, the dismissal could not be justified, and the moment no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. This transfer of authority was not accidental. Crockett had crafted her response in a way that made clear she was not simply defending herself but redefining the terms of the interaction. She made it known that respect was not optional, and in doing so, she claimed a higher ground than the one Kavanaugh had presumed to stand on. What made it so effective was that she never had to explicitly demand that higher ground. She took it by being unshaken, by making his levity look small beside her gravity. Kavanaugh, for all his experience, could not undo the impression. In trying to dismiss her with a laugh, he had exposed his own carelessness, and in facing her reply, he had been rendered silent. Authority had shifted because Crockett proved that credibility comes not from position alone but from conduct. She showed that real authority lies in how one handles dismissal, and that a calm refusal to yield can silence even the most powerful. In the end, the laugh that was meant to undercut her, instead undermined him. Crockett left the chamber with her arguments intact, and her composure unshaken. While Kavanaugh was left with the memory of how quickly control can slip away, the balance of authority had shifted because she chose not to let the moment pass. She claimed the space with precision, and once she did, the room recognized who truly held the floor. The exchange between Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Jasmine Crockett ended up being remembered less for the chuckle itself and more for what followed. A laugh, fleeting and almost careless, had the potential to reduce her words to something trivial. But instead, Crockett transformed that moment into a turning point, one that shifted the tone of the entire proceeding. It showed that authority is not only about rank or title, it is about presence, discipline, and the ability to reclaim respect when it is threatened. Her response carried no theatrics, no grandstanding. It was not the kind of reaction designed for headlines. yet it became one precisely because of how it unfolded. She didn't scold or erupt. She didn't match disrespect with anger. Instead, she chose a colder, sharper approach that left no room for doubt about who controlled the exchange. Her words were brief, her tone unflinching, and her silence before speaking amplified the weight of every syllable. The chamber seemed to lean toward her, as if gravity itself had shifted. Kavanaugh, by contrast, was left in the awkward position of his own choosing. His laughter, intended perhaps to signal disbelief or mockery, now looked out of place. It reminded those watching how easily power can be misused, even in subtle ways. And once Crockett drew attention to it, the casual dismissal could no longer be brushed aside. His authority was not destroyed, but it was weakened, if only for a moment, by the realization that someone without his title could command more respect through discipline alone. The larger lesson in that exchange was about how fragile power can be when it rests on habit rather than substance. Kavanaugh's chuckle was a habit of dismissal, the kind of response people in high places often give when they feel untouchable. Crockett's response, however, was substance-grounded in her commitment to be heard, to speak for those who trusted her, and to refuse to let even a laugh diminish the seriousness of her role. That contrast made clear which side held real authority in that moment. What lingered afterward was not the sound of his chuckle but the memory of her composure. Observers left recalling how a single measured reply could silence a justice. How control could be taken back, not with noise, but with clarity. It reminded many that respect is not automatically granted to those with power. It must be maintained through conduct. And when that conduct falters, even briefly, authority can slip away to those who carry themselves with steadier conviction. Crockett's response was more than a defense of her argument. It was a reminder of what it means to demand respect in rooms where it is often withheld. She proved that even in the presence of a Supreme Court justice, no one is beyond accountability. In turning his laugh into his silence, she showed that true authority lies not in the title on the nameplate, but in the discipline of the voice that refuses to be dismissed. Would you like me to combine all keynotes plus ending into one long continuous storytelling piece for you? So it